And Meakin.
Take one, interview with Meakin.
And for chemistry.
Can you tell me about that incident with the night that the Viet Cong suspect was shot?
Yeah, I remember I was in Perth at the time, and there was this widely syndicated film clip showing a South Vietnamese commander shooting a Viet Cong suspect in the head at close quarters. It was a very dramatic piece of news film, and we showed it expecting the switchboard to be jammed with complaints. You know, it's disgusting to show something like that at 6:30 at night. And I think we got one call of complaint. But interestingly, in the same night, we showed some not quite as horrendous film, in my eyes, of baby seals being slaughtered in Canada. And the switchboard ran hot. Hundreds of calls of complaint, but only one for the Viet Cong suspect.
Can you equate why people relate to animals like that but not to other human beings?
Well, I think Australians have a softer spot for animals than they do for human beings in other countries.
In other words, you would see Vietnam virtually as being a racist war?
I wouldn't say it was racist, I'd say it was remote. I think people identify with animals wherever they are, and it was just a little communist who got shot.
Do you think that the commercial stations really lived up to their responsibility of trying to report the Vietnam War from the Australian point of view?
I think they did, yes. I think they made an honest effort. I think the film that came down from Vietnam, as shown on Australian television stations by and large, was very disappointing compared with the American footage. Now, American television viewers, and remember there was colour television then, were getting nightly doses of people being shot in the trenches, blood and everything. In Australian, as far as the Australian forces were concerned, we got a very milk and water coverage.
Why was that though? Was that because the commercial stations didn't have any camera crews up there covering the war?
Some of them did, but there was very little action footage of Australian troops in Vietnam.
Yeah, why is that? Is that because the commercial stations didn't send men up there?
No, even if they did send men up there, you know, they'd be taken on guided tours and they'd be shown shots of little Vietnamese children having injections from the nice Australian troops and stuff like that. There wasn't any action footage. And I think, from speaking to an army cameraman, it was considered bad for morale to show Australians getting shot.
But from a news point of view, as a news editor, surely with the initiative that Australian newsmen have got in other places, they would have been able to get in and get the action footage that was warranted.
It's not that easy. I mean, the American camera crews, I wasn't there. This is what I've been told by people who did go there, that you know, people from other countries had the cooperation of the military. I know we had the cooperation of the military. This is a current affair when we sent a crew up there. But we had cooperation from the South Vietnamese military and the American military, not the Australians.
Why didn't they go up with the South Vietnamese army then and report the war from their point of view?
Talking from the point of a current affair, we did. And we did get some action material. In fact, we got shot at by the South Vietnamese troops themselves. But what I'm saying is, I don't think the war was brought home to Australians as it was to people in other countries.
Why then?
Because of the fact that we didn't see Australians getting shot.
And again, just to come back, do you think that television lived up to its responsibility there then, in terms of drawing the realities of the Vietnam War to the attention of the people?
I think television lived up to its responsibilities. I think that the army was very conscious of the war as being a public relations exercise. And we were inhibited in that. I mean, civilians can't just walk into a war zone with cameras blazing and expect not to get shot. You do require a military backup.
While you were news editor for 2 or 3 years with Channel 10, how many news teams were sent up to Vietnam to cover the war?
I honestly don't recall. It's that long ago, but I'd say 1 or 2 probably.
And how long would they have stayed in the war zone?
A couple of weeks at a time.
And why is this? Can they really get an objective view of what's happening if they're only there for a short time, a swan's tour?
Swan's tour, I've never heard that expression.
In terms of they're in and they're out, they're gone.
No, I think it's difficult to get an objective view unless you're somewhere all the time. I agree, but you know, we did rely very largely on getting material from syndicated sources such as Viz News and CBS and NBC.
So wouldn't that give us America's version of the war?
Well,
then?
we certainly got the American coverage of the war. In my view, was far better than anyone else's.
But again, it was seen through American eyes,
exactly.
wasn't
It was footage, but you know, the Australian material which we had, and which was being pumped down to us by Viz News and by Australian sources, Australian Army sources, was in news terms rubbish.
But so therefore, since it was rubbish and since it's coming from and obviously a biased source, the Army, shouldn't commercial stations said, right, it's our responsibility to go up there and see what's really happening, you know?
Well, we did go up there, but most commercial stations just don't have the resources to keep people in Vietnam all the time.
So it came back to money, basically.
It was money. Money's a limiting factor, yes. And the fact that is, if we had crews there anyway, I don't think the result would have been much difference as far as coverage is concerned. Because the Australian Army just did not see fit to cooperate in providing cover of action. They were very keen for us, as I said, to take shots of Vietnamese kids having injections and people handing food parcels out and stuff like that, but no action.
The ABC was hamstrung because it was supposed to be objective, it was supposed to present a balanced report, but the commercial stations weren't. Why couldn't they really tell the war as it was, so it would have ended the war a lot earlier?
Well, how do you suggest we should have told the war as it was?
Well, for instance, point out that Australia was handing out food parcels, that they didn't really see much of the action over there.
I think there was a lot more to the Vietnam War than handing out food parcels. What I'm saying is that because of the attitude of the Australian military forces in Vietnam, that we wouldn't have got a much better coverage up there in terms of action. And it was action that provided the impact. It was action that I think provoked America's you know, withdrawal from the war.
If you had a report of the fact that Australia wasn't seeing much action, which it seems they weren't, do you think this would have made people question the fact that Australia shouldn't have had a troop presence there in the first place?
I'm sorry, again?
If you had a report that the Australian troops weren't seeing much of the action, it was largely public relations exercise in keeping with our politics and our alignment with America, do you think that people would have changed their minds on the Vietnam War a lot earlier?
If Australians had seen their own troops being shot, you mean?
No, well, it seems that Australians didn't see much action.
I understood you to say if Australians had seen their troops being shot, would it have brought an earlier conclusion to the war? Or public pressure, this end?
No, if you had a report that there wasn't any real Australian involvement in the war in terms of real fighting, I mean, there was token pieces here and there, but there wasn't, you know, particularly towards the end, there wasn't much happening, was there? Yet we continued to keep troops there for a long time.
But I still don't follow your question.
All right, well, forget that. In terms of what you said before of television prolonging the war, what did you mean?
You know, we saw casualty figures in the newspapers, but that wasn't translated into reality for the television viewer on film. And I think it did seem very distant. The people we saw being shot were largely Americans or South Vietnamese or Viet Cong. So they weren't Australians, and so I think there was a tendency to think of the war as being remote. The only thing that Australians did see about the war, and this was the biggest impact, was demonstrations in the streets back in Australia. And most of the reaction I heard at the time was from people who'd ring up and say, those dirty left-wingers, get them off the streets. You know, my husband was 30 minutes late home for tea tonight because he was held up by the demonstrators in the streets, the dirty communists and all the rest of it. And I think that sort of provoked a reaction against the anti-war demonstrators.
Do you think that television followed public opinion or it led public opinion on the war?
That's a difficult one. I don't think television influenced public opinion very much at all.